And I am just so delighted to be joined by these three very patient, purposeful authors who are bringing us a really needed resource, which is a dispute system design book with a lot of great examples across a very wide range of practice areas. The purpose of our party today is to both learn from them a little bit about the book and then celebrate. So we're going to do that by having each author speak for a few minutes, and then we'll rotate them through a series of breakout rooms so you have a chance to be in a smaller group setting to ask your questions and visit. And you can leave the breakout room and come back to the main room if you so desire. Certainly the whole group will do that towards the latter part of the party. And anything else logistically, Hind or Maddie? So let me introduce Hind Al-Jarbara, who's our Senior Academic Program Coordinator, and Maddie Robertson, our Deputy Director, who are helping me with all things Zoom and have already successfully averted a minor disaster with a Zoom bomber that we just got about 5 minutes ago. So anything, Maddie and Hind, you want to add?
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm Deputy Director CNDR. Nice to meet all you. Glad to be joining. I'm our host for this evening, so if you have any problems, you can let me or Hind know, and I'll try to fix them for you.
Okay, we can chat with you. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Feel free to use the chat. We'll keep an eye on it. I'm going to admit Colin Rule. Okay, great. So with that, I will briefly introduce our co-host, Grande Lum, who was a former director of the center here at Hastings and has gone on to do many great things. He will be an author at another book party that we'll be having. We haven't set the date yet, but for his book, America's Peacemaker. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that too. He's currently the provost of Menlo College, and he will be introducing our authors. Take it away, Grande.
Thank you, Sheila. And this is such a wonderful occasion. I could not help but want to co-host what I think is the first book party for this incredible book, and I want to show it to folks. It's an incredibly wonderful book. So I'm just going to quickly introduce the authors because it's more important to hear from them. They are all dear friends, and the accomplishment is just really impressive. They really dug deep into this and really thought so carefully about dispute system design. So with that, I want to introduce our first co-author, Stephanie Smith. She's a lecturer in law at Stanford Law School and the senior consultant at the Flora Family Foundation. She was a litigator and partner at a San Francisco law firm, the first director of ADR programs for the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California, and a consulting officer for the conflict resolution program of the Hewlett Foundation, which we know provided a ton of funding for dispute resolution. She is taught, trained, and consulted internationally, and she hopes to be able to do so again someday, consult internationally as well. Our second author is Janet Martinez, and she's the director of the Martin Daniel Gould Center for Conflict Resolution and senior lecturer in law at Stanford Law School, where she teaches advanced negotiation, dispute system design, and alternative dispute resolution law, practice and policy. Martinez practice, or Jan, you put, this is what Jan wanted me to read. She puts Martinez. I want to say Jan practiced corporate law for 10 years in San Francisco, after which Jan spent 10 years in Cambridge, Massachusetts on her doctoral research, consulting with the well-known Consensus Building Institute and Lax and Sabinius. Her current research includes online dispute resolution and dispute system design. And of course, last but not least is Lisa Blomgren Amsler, formerly Bingham, and she's the Distinguished Professor and Kelly Rundin Professor at Indiana University's O'Neill School of Public Environmental Affairs in Bloomington. Prior to joining the IU faculty in 1989, she practiced public sector law for a decade and was a partner at Shipman and Goodwin. She's also a Saltman Senior Scholar at the William S. Boyd School of Law, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and an elected fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. So we have three very distinguished teachers and practitioners of dispute resolution. And we agreed that we want to make sure to hear from all of them. So they're going to each speak for 5 minutes each. And I want to turn it over first to Stephanie.
Thank you, Grande. And first of all, thank you to Sheila and Grande for putting this together. It's so kind of you to do. And also thanks to Maddie and Hin for making this all work, because that kind of help is so much needed. Also, thanks to all of you for joining us. For those who are coming in, we had a Zoom issue with the first link, so I hope everyone's finding the second link and finding their way in. As many of you know, this journey began 13 years ago. It feels like the last 4 months have been a very long time. 13 years has been a very long time. And thanks to many of you who are on this call who reviewed early drafts, sometimes middle drafts, sometimes late drafts. Over 13 years, there have been many drafts, and we appreciated your ideas, your brainstorming, your corrections. So thanks to you all. And also thanks to all of you just for your friendship and your support. We all faced some challenges over these 13 years that caused us to leave the book for a while, and we all made it back in, and we couldn't have done it without all of your friendship and support. So thanks to you all for being here and for all your support in getting us to this point and getting this book out. I've been asked to tell a little bit of my piece of the creation story. And so my piece begins around 2002. And Maud Pervere, I think you're here. Wave and say something so we can find you.
Hi. Yay for the book.
Hey, Maud. So Maud Pervere was the first director of the Gould program, which Jan now leads. And she was nice enough to invite me to join the inaugural group of teachers around 1997. And after teaching negotiation for a while, she said, why don't we come up with a new class? And she suggested system design, which we called, I think, conflict resolution system design at the time. I had been, as Grande mentioned, the first director of the ADR program in the federal court in San Francisco Bay Area. I also had been the rapporteur for the group that made recommendations on changing Kaiser Permanente's binding arbitration program, which had been severely criticized by the state Supreme Court. So I had a couple of experiences, and we just put together a class where we invited in other people who had done this kind of work because there wasn't a whole lot written. And we came up with a framework, which is the framework that is really the structure that carries through the case chapters in the book. And so in a minute, I will describe those elements for you and give you an introduction. We started out with a very long list of elements, and then when Jan, who was one of our first guests in the class in 2002, talking about WTO and her research, she and I started teaching the class together in 2008, and we started shaping the number of elements in the framework. So it's now a somewhat more compact list, and we even evolved a little bit more during the course of writing the book. So to get us started, let me tell you a little bit about what those the framework elements are. They are described in chapter 3 of the book, and as I say, carried through the case chapters. So the first in the framework is goals, because you need to know what your goals are if you're going to have any hope of achieving them. Questions under that include, what do the system's decision makers and designers seek to accomplish? And what kind of conflicts are you trying to address? Are you dealing with one particular type of dispute or conflict? Are you looking at a broader array of conflicts and disputes? Second is stakeholders. Who are they? What is their relative power? How are their interests reflected in the system? And how will you then involve them in the design or redesign of a process if that's what you're doing? The third is context and culture. And originally this was subsumed in another category. And over time we decided that it really needs its own attention because context is so important to figure out whether other examples relate to what you're doing, what you're trying to improve, or whether there are specific elements in your context that really cause these others not to be as relevant. Processes and structure, what are the processes that you want to be using to prevent, manage, and resolve disputes? So in the book, we call these system building blocks. They're in chapter 3. We have a long list of kind of every variety of mediation, arbitration, conciliation, all the things we can think of, and tried to attach definitions to those. Because those are the pieces you put together when you're to create the system. We also ask if there's more than one process, are they linked or integrated in some way? If not, how would you link or integrate them? What are the incentives and disincentives for using this system? Financial incentives, disincentives, other incentives or disincentives? And then how does the system interact with the formal legal system? As with, say, binding arbitration or others. What are the ways people can or cannot move between the formal legal system and the system that you have created or are living within. Then we have resources. If you're going to design a system, it's lovely, but if you don't have the resources to support it, both human resources and the financial resources to train, to evaluate, you're not going to succeed. And then the final category is success, accountability, and learning. How transparent is the system? You want transparency, but of course you have to also deal with issues of privacy and confidentiality. How do you balance those out? And do you have monitoring, learning, and evaluation components in your system? How do you do that evaluation? How do you learn in order to see if it's working and in order to make it better? And then finally, is the system successful? So does it achieve the goals that you began with at the beginning? So my thanks to Maud for starting us off and creating this, this class in this system, and Jan for joining us and making it better. And then of course for Lisa coming and bringing her great amount of knowledge, especially public sector, but in employment and labor and other areas, so that we could come up with the book. So there's the introduction, and I will then pass to Jan.
Hey, good afternoon and good evening. Thank you from people all across the land who are joining us. First, I want to thank Stephanie and Lisa, my friends and colleagues, for staying with me up and downs over the year that we would be able to put this together. I think we learned the tests of collaboration, what it really means. And hopefully we tried to apply some of the theory that we were writing in our own relationship in building this book. Thank you to Sheila and Grande for hosting us, to Hind and Maddie for making this all happen operationally, and to all of you who have come to share our gratitude and humility about finally getting this book out. And so all of you who have been asking us every year at ABA, where's the book? When's it coming? At last, it is out. I'm going to touch a little bit on what are we talking about when we say system design, and what does it mean, and what does it mean in terms of practice, and a little bit how we structured the book. This week, some of you may have read the U.S. Supreme Court decision that came out, Ramos versus Louisiana. And this is really a case of system design, because the question before the court was whether less than a unanimous verdict by a jury was going to be acceptable, and whether it was racism or whether it was efficiency that was driving the Louisiana state law with regard to that decision-making process. So we see system design in many places, maybe where we don't expect it. But in the more usual course, we were imagining a general counsel who has employment issues at his company and needs to come up with some kind of a system design for what kind of process will deal with employee complaints. Colin Rule, who I believe is on the call, Colin introduced to us the whole notion of consumer redress, and especially through eBay, how do you design an online system for dealing with online claims and services? We have transitional justice, where you have a country in post-conflict trying to decide how do they balance legitimate claims, how do they bring peace, how do you allocate justice and reparation for those who have suffered. So these are just examples at a large scale level, but I think for some of our students who have come through the pike, they have found that working on a bankruptcy case might represent an opportunity for system design. What kind of process? How do you decide which people get which process option, and who makes those choices, and who manages the overall system design? In an ideal world, we think about designers. What kind of qualities might they have? It certainly might be a lawyer advising a client that has not only just one case or incident to deal with, but sees a whole stream of disputes. So we've thought about the process assessment at the beginning of a design to involve what kind, an assessment of who are the stakeholders, who's affected, who cares about this, this kind of dispute, and then how, who will participate in that design. The design, certainly in terms of the participation, it could be an individual designer. It could be a whole team. If, as Stephanie pointed out, if the resources are adequate enough that you get a whole team of people working together, they can each bring certain talents, certain knowledge, and certain skills. So really thinking about that whole progression and really looking at how do we design the design process and who will participate in that. So the book is structured in two pieces. One is the foundations and a chapter each on the elements that Stephanie highlighted, and really goes to the backbone of what we believe is important to system design. The remaining 13 chapters are focused on different applications, and these are organized in public and community justice, including claims facilities like 9/11 and the courts. Then we have organizational cases, could be consumers, could be labor, could be employment, and so different aspects and functions of a community organization or corporation. Now we looked at a few cases in the international realm. I got to finally weave my dissertation research on the WTO systems into that chapter. So I'm glad to finally publish a piece of that. And Stephanie focused on the transitional justice and how that's played out in a number of countries with a lot of different systems in ways that they were put together. And the last section is complex systems. And we thought that environment was a particularly good application of that, where you have so many parties, so many issues, so many possible goals, and both in the public and private sector. So hopefully there's a chapter to catch your interest in different ways. And we, of course, well, two things. One, we are going to put a teaching note collection online at some point for those of you who teach and might want to have some other guidelines for running a class. And then also we'll talk a little bit more about just how this plays out in the teaching realm and do that in the small groups. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Stephanie. This has been an amazing experience. We talked a little bit about how we met each other and how it started. And my recollection at the beginning for me was actually talking to Stephanie in 1998 about arbitration research and repeat player research I was doing in her capacity as a Hewlett program officer. And my first recollection with Jan is at an ABA conference in 2000, and probably spring 2007, we think, where we were in the exhibitor hall, and it feels, this probably is a familiar, wonderful feeling for most people here, chatting with people, but chatting with each other. And she said, we should write a book on dispute system design. That's where it started. And it's been such a joy, particularly to finish it, but to work with everyone who's shared ideas with us. And as hard as it is sometimes, and all of you who have written know this, to take constructive, even constructive criticism, it's all been a better result for, we hope, for you than it would have been if any of us had done it alone, and a completely different thing. So I'm completely, utterly grateful to my co-authors, all my colleagues, and this is so much fun. this is the party that we were expecting to have at the ABA section of dispute resolution conference.
Well, with that, we should pause then and raise a glass to Lisa, Stephanie, and Jan and say congratulations, guys. This is just amazing that you crossed the finish line. That is really commendable and delighted. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for the virtual version of New Orleans. Okay. All right.
Right.
yeah, balloons. They're dropping now.
Yeah. We're all wearing beads. Okay. All right.
Okay. So I promised I would talk about a few themes that run through the book. The book has a couple of normative themes. Well, one of them is almost out of econ, and that's power, control over dispute system design. The sort of easy example is mandatory adhesive or forced arbitration. And that's where my thinking about dispute system design started. I was a public sector labor lawyer, so representing school boards and municipalities, and I love labor law, and labor law was fair, and I was an labor arbitrator and mediator. And so the idea that arbitration might not be fair in this other context took me a while to wrap my head around. So power and control over dispute system design are a thread throughout. And is that control one-party control, like adhesive arbitration? Is it all-party or two-party or joint party control, like labor arbitration, labor mediation, labor negotiation, or the classic work Lisa Bernstein did on the Diamond Dealers Club or the cotton industry, where you have democratic organizations that design a system together, or is it third-party control? So Stephanie's experience with the courts designing a system. This question then brought to us threads of literature from various disciplines. And one of the challenges for us was trying to write the book so that it would be useful to practitioners, to scholars, to students, but across a whole bunch of different disciplines. So the disciplines included law, of course, political science, social psychology, sociology, economics, policy. I'm in a school of public affairs, public administration, public policy, and business schools. And because, although I'm a lawyer, I ended up having to become a social scientist by adaptation. I ended up meeting all of these social psychologists at the International Association for Conflict Management. And each of us had different backgrounds. Jan's work on her dissertation, and I had no background in international dispute resolution. Stephanie's work in the courts, I was a labor lawyer. I did argue cases in the Connecticut Supreme Court, but I never did a trial. I didn't practice in the courts general. So this question of third-party design, who is the third party, right? And it can be an administrative agency. It can be a private company. It can be a nonprofit organization. It can be a tribal authority. When you think about community dispute resolution systems, it can be a bunch of different places. So out of that, game theory, Mark Galanter, the repeat player effect, and Eleanor Ostrom, and institutional analysis and development, which has its own framework for institutional design. And she talks about the need for an institution to have a conflict management system, but she doesn't address it. And so the framework that Jan and Stephanie and earlier Maud developed actually fits within. It's a smooth connection. So that's one piece of things. Justice is another thread that runs through the book. And there are different ways of defining justice. It comes out of philosophy, it comes out of jurisprudence. There's organizational and procedural justice coming out of social psychology. And there's distributive justice, procedural justice. We have all these different definitions of organizational justice, all these different definitions. And the way we have used it is within the framework under goals. So power really fits in under stakeholders. What stakeholders have which power? Justice has to do with what are we trying to accomplish with this system and how are we defining justice for purposes of the expectations, how people are treated in the system, what comes out of the system, what motivates it. So it can be an outcome as a dependent variable. It can be an independent variable as a goal that shapes the design. And then the third thread is this notion of accountability and success. How can we tell whether a system is producing some form of justice? And how do we measure it? And what right do people who use the system have to information about the way the system is functioning? And this became, so I moved from research on arbitration to research on mediation at the United States Postal Service in the Redress Program, and ended up being the national director of the Redress Evaluation Project. So at the end, there were 7 data sets, one of which had 276,000 exit surveys. Not what I planned to do with my life. 12 years of it. Not as long as the book, but almost. So this question of how do we measure accountability, we took literature out of public administration related to accountability in the public sector, public officials, because when you think about who's running a system and they're running it for other people, there are implicit promises that they're making about this system. And those promises go to the means that they're using, you know, like a code of ethics at the Postal Service that made it improper for a mediator to talk about who would win or lose under that model. So a code of ethics would be part of the means. And then justice might be part of the ends. And we have on page 76 a table describing the 6 different promises as to means and ends that relate to accountability in the system. So how do we measure it? How do we release the information to people? We wanted to include all of that in the book. I think I'm out of my 5 minutes. I think I've used 6, I'm sorry. So we should, I'll stop there.
You were really concise, Lisa.
There's a lot to cover, ladies. So, well, I thought we would break into small groups now and allow the authors to converse more conversationally with those in the randomly selected groups. As I said, you're welcome to return to the main room, which everyone will do in about 15 to 20 minutes after we've rotated the authors through each of the small groups. Is that how it's working, Maddie? Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct. 3 breakout rooms, each will have an author, and then we'll move the authors just because it's easier that way. But some of us will stay in the main room, and that can be just kind of the social room. If you want to come back and hang out with us, we'll be here.
But all of you in the breakout room should feel free to have your, your water and your cheese and crackers, your wine, your mocktail. This is a party after all.
Oh, thanks. So Sheila, Maddie, I should just pay attention to my breakout, and I should go to the breakout room that I'm told to.
We'll move you around, right?
Okay. All right.
I'll
Thank
send you
you.
around, and then I'll send a little message about a minute
Okay.
before we switch. And then after we do each of those rounds, we'll come all back together.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Are we ready?
Why not?
Ready, let's
All
go.
right.
Ready?
There you go. All right. got everyone assigned to a room.
Everybody? I have Brenda here.
She is assigned, just hasn't joined yet. She's assigned, Brenda is assigned to room 1. So let me pause our recording in here.
There's so many of you I want to visit with. Good to
Agreed.
see you. Hey, Maud, how are you?
Oh, fortunately, great. I should ask you the same, Sheila. How are you?
Doing pretty well, all told. So great to see you.
I've been thinking about you as these years have gone by. I know with lots of good, anyway, I keep in touch with you through other people.
Well, I hope they're all well, whoever they may be. So
Stephanie and Jan.
Yeah. We're the conduits. Yeah.
yeah, and hi everybody. Hi Steve. Hi Donna. Hi Colin. So this is the free form part. We welcome you to make a toast if you have one to any of the authors or all three. Raise a glass.
Okay. All right. Glass of water. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Water.
And his is ready.
Yeah. Well, I am so grateful for all the people in the room here who have visited our class and who contributed their work, their teaching, their ideas. Most of you here have done that gift to us, and I think that's one of the positives of the book. Grande asked me if I had a favorite chapter. Well, I guess I was thinking case chapters. Actually, I think the framework chapter is probably my favorite chapter because that's what we wanted to say and what we felt was important. But I think the fact that we've been able to touch so many of you in your practice and your teaching and weave it into our writing, that was a real gift of the community that you are. So thank you.
So true. And Steve Tobin,
Yeah.
there's a thank you to you at the very end, and to the Hewlett Foundation for its support of the field for a long time. And I hope you're feeling the sense of what the legacy of the field and all that support is. I mean, it goes on.
Yeah.
It's institutionalized in all sorts of ways. Of course, what I love these days is thinking about system design and then watching this notion of beehives and the thousands of arbitration claims that individual drivers filed against a company that had an arbitration clause that prohibited class arbitration. And now it's hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yes. Oh, yes. That was a phenomenal article. Exactly. They got what they asked for. Yeah.
So it goes on. It doesn't end.
No. So Steve, I believe you were my program officer when I was at CBI, and you gave us the grant for trade and environment. Yeah. So that was, my dissertation came out of that. so it had a long tail.
And Dan, I worked on that grant as well, but I didn't know you.
You did not know me. I know we had cross paths in 2 places, MIT and that grant. And yeah, very interesting. And then we finally became closest to friends and colleagues. So that's nice.
Oh, Sheila, you're muted.
You're muted.
Final toast. Some of us will hang out a bit beyond 5:30, but any final words of wisdom to our authors? You made it.
Oh, yeah.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
With a
Thank
little
you.
help from our friends.
So
Thank
I'd like
you.
to say something to the authors.
Yes.
So all of us, one way or another, are in the dispute resolution field, either practicing or teaching or writing. We have kind of an odd field, and as everybody knows, it's kind of a mishmash of a lot of different things. And in the whole history of our field since Getting to Yes was written, there's really not that many books that have really made a difference, actually. Some, but not that many. There's always a reframing of the basic core ideas, which are still important and make a contribution. But I believe that this book really makes a big new contribution. It was obviously a labor of love. That's no question. I also feel like it adds to the field in a big way, both in terms of, in all areas, in the scholarly area, which ended up being a big part of the book, in teaching to support system design classes all across the country, and for practitioners out there trying to think about these problems in organizations. So I believe that I really believe you guys made a big, important contribution to the field. I just wanted to say that. Congratulations.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for hanging out in a virtual space. Not nearly so much fun as we imagined, but Sheila and Grande made it a welcoming place and an opportunity to share this time with you. So thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank
Thank you for having us.